Guys, thank you for being here this morning. I know we've already said it, but man, if you're visiting with us, especially you, thank you so much for just being a guest with us. We invite you to stick around afterwards and be part of the meal that we're sharing after service. I should actually make sure that we have meals left over before I start saying that. But we've been doing that fundraiser. We've been serving a lot of meals. It's been good. I'm excited about this new sermon series that I'm going to get to preach through. One of the most common illustrations in Scripture is God saying, I am the shepherd, and you guys are my sheep, and trying to remind us that life gets really hard when we exist as a sheep without a shepherd. I looked this up in my sermon prep because I Googled it to see if other people feel this way, because I kind of was raised to believe this. But when I was a kid, calling somebody a sheep was like a dirty word. Like, it was an insult, right? Because what it meant is you are an ideologue and you don't think for yourself, and you're really just a follower. And so, like, I hung out with the rebellious kids. I played in a punk band, and all of us like scrangly, is that a word? Mohawk, saggy pants, like all the kids that were like doing everything we could to like break the dress code but not get expelled. All of those kids, like the alternative kids, the ones that like really didn't have a good look for the normies, right? We would look at them and we'd be like, look at all of those sheep. Look at all those sheeple, right? They're just followers, and sheep follow the herd, and the herd's dumb, and so don't be a sheep, right? That's kind of what I just believed as a kid. I looked it up, and like people have written articles going, how can God be a loving God and refer to his people as sheep? Like that denigrates me and my human autonomy, because I'm my own person and nobody tells me what to do, and so how dare you call me a sheep? And then you open up the Bible, and the Bible is just like, yeah, but you are a sheep. And the sooner you can realize that is the sooner you can realize that everybody's a sheep, because everybody is following something. You're following something, right? Like, you have some principles that are guiding your life. If you don't know what those principles are, if you don't have like actual specific principles and morals and values that are helping you to organize and orient your life, I want you to think about it. What drives you? What motivates you? What helps you know where you're going and where you want to go and how you plan on getting there? Because if you don't have principles, if you don't have, like, we as Christians, we have the Bible. We get to use the Bible to help guide and organize and orient our life. And if you're not a believer, then the question is, what are you going after? What motivates your heart? Are you somebody that you're just like, I'm not a sheep, nobody tells me what to do, I'm autonomous, I make my own decisions, and you're one of those people where you're like, I'm the smartest person in the room, I get to decide, and nobody can tell me. And so if that's you, then you are your own shepherd. You are your own God. You worship the God of yourself. And you find yourself, tell me if I'm wrong, you find yourself going after the passions of your flesh, the desires of your heart, like you just kind of are scattered, and you're going after whatever it is that is shiny and gets your attention. So you see an influencer online, you see a pop star, a musician that you look up to, you see a ball player that you idolize, whatever it is. You look at what they have, you look at their lifestyle, you go, I wish my life was more like that, and then you just start living that way. You start wearing those brands, you start buying those products, right? Like, there's something that is guiding your life. And what I've kind of learned is something can mean anything, and anything isn't always good. We open the Bible, and Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I'm the one that's guiding you, and it's actually for you. I'm not here to take from you. I'm not here to steal from you. I'm not here to use the flock to empower myself. We've seen a lot of shepherds that do that. I'm not like the government, where it's my job to heal and to help and to give and to strengthen, and yet oftentimes those shepherds use it to empower themselves and to enrich themselves and to bless themselves at the expense of other people. Maybe you were raised in a home where maybe you didn't have a mom or a dad in the home. And so maybe you were without one of those shepherds. And so whoever it is, like whether it's your family, where you go, like, I'm mad at the world because I didn't have the shepherds I was supposed to. I didn't have somebody to teach me. I didn't have somebody to guide me. Or maybe it's like, well, I'm at that church. I've got church hurt because that church was poorly led. And so those shepherds actually hurt me and it took me further away from God instead of drawing me closer to God. Or maybe it's just you're looking around at society, you're looking at your government, and you're going, man, I question the leadership. I'm worried that maybe the powers that be don't have my best interests in mind. It's to that audience that we get Ezekiel chapter 4. This is an illustration. The illustration of God as a shepherd and us as the sheep is all throughout the Bible. We're going to spend several weeks kind of looking at different ideas throughout Scripture using this illustration. But the longest one we have is a whole chapter in the Old Testament. So this is almost 3,000 years ago, old ancient wisdom. And we're seeing what the role of a shepherd is supposed to be and what happens to people when the shepherds fail you in your life. So maybe that's your government, maybe that's your school, maybe that's your church, maybe that's your family. But when you don't have good shepherds, where do you end up? And so Ezekiel chapter 34, let's just start with this. Let's start with how Jesus says it in Matthew 9, and then we'll jump into Ezekiel. Matthew 9, verse 36. Jesus looks out at the crowds and has compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. When a lamb does not have a shepherd, when he's outside of the flock, when he's wandered off and gotten himself lost, he is helpless. He can't defend himself. He can't protect himself. And because he's helpless, the wolves start circling. The predators start showing up. And as the predators start showing up, the lambs began to be picked apart. They began to be troubled and harassed. And so Jesus is looking out at the crowds of people. They're going, man, things are so hard for them. Life has gotten so bad for them. They're harassed on all fronts. They're harassed and they're helpless. They feel stuck and they don't know where to go. They are like sheep without a shepherd. Let's just start with that. Whether you like it or not, whether you're comfortable with the language or not, you're a sheep. You're part of some kind of a flock, some kind of community, some kind of people group somewhere. There's some group that you identify with that represents you. And what the Bible says is you are a sheep and you are following after something. But if you follow after the wrong shepherd, you end up scattered and you end up helpless and harassed by the threats of the outside world. So here's what Ezekiel 34 says. I want you to keep in mind that at that time period, they're kind of a theocratic nation, so their governing authorities and their spiritual authorities are the same people, right? So when they talk about elders, when they talk about shepherds in this time period, they are talking about their political figures, the people that are making laws. They are also talking about their church leaders, the people that are supposed to lead people spiritually, because in this time period, the kingdom of Israel, it's all one in the same. And so we're going to talk about it through all the different lenses that we experience this. The word of the Lord came to me. This is Ezekiel the prophet speaking. And he said, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. So God's showing up. He's going, hey, you've got bad leaders and I've got beef with the bad leaders. I've got issues because they were supposed to lead you. They're supposed to protect you. They're supposed to take care of you. They're supposed to help you, and they have failed you. So if you grew up in a home, and you're like, I've got daddy issues, dad wasn't around or mom wasn't around or I wasn't taken care of the way that I was supposed to. Or you came up in a church that used its power and influence to take advantage of people, to abuse people, to enrich themselves at the expense of other people. If you come up in a society or a country where people don't trust their leaders and they're worried about, and they go, I don't think their leaders actually have my interest in mind, then what God's saying, he's going, look, those shepherds, they failed you. And I want you to prophesy against the leaders of the time. He says, prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? That's the job of the shepherd. Your job as a shepherd is to take care of the flock. And if you use the flock to empower yourself, if you sacrifice the flock to empower yourself rather than sacrificing yourself to empower the flock, you can call yourself a good shepherd. You can call yourself a shepherd. You're just not a good shepherd, right? He says, you eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. So you fleece them, you take from them, but you don't give back to them. A lot of churches operate that way. A lot of churches build an empire and then use the empire to protect the empire. They use their resources to empower themselves, to enrich themselves. A lot of family dynamics have that idea. A lot of government systems work just like that. This is exactly what a tyrannical system looks like. He says, you've not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. I love Christians, because I was raised like this. I love Christians who see it as part of their faith, as part of their mission, to bring back the strays, to go out and find those that have no community, that see the kid that's sitting alone at the lunch table, or sees the person that's been put out and doesn't have people around them to help them out, and practices a lifestyle of, can I open up my home? Can I open up my friend group? Can I open a door for this person? What can I do to make sure that we're bringing back the strays, that we're searching for those who are lost? He says, you have ruled them harshly and brutally. So I want you to put these two verses together. Let's back up. So in one instance of what bad leadership looks like in all fronts, it looks like neglect, right? You haven't helped those who were injured. You haven't searched for the lost. You haven't taken in the strays. You've neglected them. You cared about yourself. You just didn't care about them. And then the other side of bad leadership, the other side of that coin isn't neglect, it's control. Right? It's wanting to be so involved and not trusting in God, not trusting in the good shepherd, but I'm the leader, I'm in charge, and so I'm going to use my authority, I'm going to use my power to be harsh with people, to abuse people, to control people, to micromanage people. And so on either side of the coin, you have the leaders who are not good shepherds. They do not lead well because they are neglectful of the family in the home. They're neglectful of the congregation around them in the church. They're neglectful of the socioeconomic classes lower than them in their country. And then you have the other side of that uses their power to be harsh, to be critical, to be controlling, to be condemning. And so two sides of the bad leadership coin. And he says, look, this is where you're at now. God is looking at his nation. He's going, this is what this looks like. This is how you've behaved. You have not been good shepherds. You've neglected people. You've enriched yourself. You haven't helped. You haven't healed. You haven't sought. You haven't reached out. And when you have gotten involved, you've ruled harshly. You've ruled brutally. And here's the result. And so I just want you to think about your life if you've experienced that in your family, either neglect or a harshness, a cruelty, or if you've experienced that in the church world before, where the leaders are like, we used to call them like boardroom elders, right? I know the elders here at Riverside, that's one of the things that they were so big on, is they said, man, if I'm going to serve as an elder, I want to get to just actually shepherd the flock. I want to pastor the people. I don't want to be the elder that spends my time being stuck in the business meetings of the church. Like, let's get a board to worry about that. If I'm going to pastor, let me pastor, right? And so that's how we try to do it. And so if you've been a part of a church where the leaders empower themselves, but they use your resources to empower them rather than their resources to empower you. That's what this looks like. If you've been a part of a nation, of a government system that feels divided and feels split up and feels scattered and feels hurt and feels untrusting and feels like you can't trust in institutions, you can't trust in authority, you can't trust in power struggles because they're only going to use it to help them at my expense, then this verse should speak to you. Because here's the result, and tell me if this has been the result in your life, in your family, in your church, in your nation, in your community. The result of that kind of leadership is, so they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. That's what happens. When the sheep have no shepherd, they wander off. They either go, well, nobody's going to give me a direction, so I'm just going to go where I want. I'm going to go after whatever my heart is going after. If I'm lacking in principles, if I'm lacking in morals, if I'm lacking in values, if I had nothing guiding my life, then all I have left is to direct my life towards the passions of my heart, the passions of my lying, conceited, selfish, fleshly heart, and just hope that I land somewhere good. And so what happens is everybody goes their own direction. Nobody's unified. Nobody trusts the teachings or the guidance of a good shepherd, and so they scatter. We get scattered, and we get divided, and once we're divided, we feel alone, and we feel scared, and if we're ever in a desperate situation, we feel hopeless, and we feel lacking, and we feel without, and that's when the wolves come out. He says, can you back up one? They were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. The Bible warns us. In fact, he warns the church. He says, from amongst you. In fact, there was a time when the Apostle Paul is heading somewhere and takes the time to call the elders of a particular church, the shepherds of a church, to him. He meets with the elders and he looks the leaders of the church in the eyes and he says, from among you, there will be wolves dressed in sheep's clothing. And on the outside, they look like sheep, but inwardly, they are ravenous wolves seeking someone to devour. And this is what Scripture says. Scripture is just like, man, when the sheep don't have a shepherd, when they're not unified, when they're not driving the same direction, when everybody just scatters, it's easy picking for the wolves. The predators come out. The teeth come out, and they look at hurting people, they look at desperate people, they look at broke people, they look at the injured people, they look at the lost and scattered people, and they see them as the buffet. And so he says they were scattered, there's no shepherds, and so they become food for the animals. I just want you to think about your family, think about your church, think about your life, think about the society, the time that we live in, and tell me if you don't see that. There's a lot of people scattered. They don't have community. They don't have good principles. They don't have something driving them and orienting their life. And the result is there's a lot of hurting people. There's a lot of lonely people. There's a lot of anxious and depressed people being preyed on by the wolves of the world. Now, I don't say any of that to scare you because this is a good news sermon. We'll get there. He goes on, he says this. He says, my sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill, and they were scattered over the whole earth, and nobody searched or looked for them. And you know what that's like, right? Like you've seen that. Like we now live in a culture where people will just grab a hold of anything and call it truth. They will check every mountain, every valley. They will try anything, go anywhere, do anything, experience anything. And it doesn't matter if it's destructive. It doesn't matter if it's bad for them. They're just searching for something and they don't know where to look. And so the Bible describes it. He's like, man, my people are scattered. They're divided. There's no unity amongst them. He says, therefore, you shepherds. So if you're a parent, this is you. If you serve in your church, this is you. If you stand out in your school, if you're a leader in any way, then this is for you. He says, therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds, and I will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. Back up. He says, I will rescue my flock from the mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. And look at this. I myself will search for my sheep, and I myself will look after them. A beautiful promise of the Bible. I think about a passage that stands out to me is when God says, I will be a father to the fatherless. I grew up in a single mom home, and my mom worked 2 or 3 jobs at a time to keep food on the table for us. And so we weren't not parented, we were just underparented. You know what I mean? Like we didn't have a lot of discipline because mom's at work trying to pay bills and trying to keep food on the table. And so we were just kind of like Lord of the Flies in my house, like kind of like just living how we want and doing what I want. And so it wasn't until I got older that I started to see an example of what a father figure is supposed to be. And so I take great comfort in Bible verses where it says, I will be a father to the fatherless. Where the shepherds have failed you in your life, where your leaders have failed you in your life, I will step in and I will be the shepherd, and I will guide you. When your national leaders fail you, I will comfort you, and I will rescue you. When your church leaders fail you, I will unify you, and I will give you something that you can hold on to, that you can galvanize to. When your family fails you, when your parents fail you, I will be there, and I will comfort you, and I will rescue you. And if you're here this morning and you are a parent, I hope you take great comfort from that verse. I will be a father to the fatherless. That means you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get it right all the time, because we worship the good shepherd. We worship he who steps in when we fail. We worship he who takes over when my leadership is weak and when my pastoral ministry is faulty and small and failing. We worship a big God. He goes, look, they failed you. I have this against my shepherds. They will not get to do that anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the slack. I will be the shepherd for you. I will take care of my people. I will search for my sheep. I will look after my sheep. He says, as a shepherd looks after, next verse, as a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so I will look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on the day of clouds and darkness. We're going to skip down a few verses. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down. That's a reference of Psalm 23, where he says he is the good shepherd and he makes us to lie down in green pastures. And he leads us to the still and quiet waters. He says, I will tend my sheep and I will have them lay down, declares the Lord. I will give them rest, in other words, declares the Lord. I will search for the lost. I will bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured. I will strengthen the weak. But the sleek and the strong, those I will destroy, declares the Lord. This is what God's saying to us. He goes, all of you who think you can do it your own way, all of you who think you're smart enough, all of you who think you're strong enough, all of you who pretend to worship God, but you know in your heart of hearts that you and your desires and your cravings and your passions are actually the only God that you find yourself worshiping. To all of you who worship yourself, to all of you who think you can manage it on your own, to all of you that are well-spoken and sleek, to all of you that are big and strong and tough and can take whatever comes, he goes, y'all are the ones that get destroyed. To all of you that are smart enough to admit that you're not that smart, vulnerable enough to admit that you're not that strong, that you're a sheep, and you tend to wander off, and you tend to get stuck, you tend to get lost, you tend to have moments where you feel desperate and helpless and harassed. He says, those I will strengthen. I'll strengthen the weak. I'll bind up the injured. I'll take care of them. It's the sleek and the strong that I destroy. What I've noticed is, because when I was young, I was like, man, those people are sheep. They don't think for themselves. They're all just ideologues. You get a little older, you get a little wiser, and you go, wait, that's all of us. Like all of us are following something. All of us are chasing after something. And what we choose, that is, like what we decide is going to organize and orient our life is what makes a difference in where we end up. You grow a little bit, you get a little bit smarter, and you start to understand what Socrates meant like 500 years before Jesus, really not long after this was written. Guys like Socrates are writing, and Socrates would say things like, the more that I know, the more I know that I know nothing. He says, and he would say several different variations of that the smarter I get, like the more I know, the more I realize how little I know. And isn't that just the truth, that we get a little bit wiser, a little bit more mature, and we look at the world, and we go, man, everybody's a follower. Everybody's chasing after something. I can do it on my own. I can try to go where I want to go, or I can just pick something bigger than me, stronger than me, smarter than me, more sure-footed than me, somebody that can see further than I can see, somebody that can see the forest through the trees, me who gets scared of the storm, me who's afraid to walk through the valley of darkness. Am I not better off putting my faith in the shepherd who says, I'll carry you through the dark times, I'll get you through the storm, I can see what's on the other side, I know where we're leading. You don't have to trust in yourself, you don't have to trust in the flock, you don't have to trust in the ways of the world, you can trust in me. And I will strengthen you, and I will heal you, and if you scatter, I will bring you back. If you wander off, I will search after you. In fact, if it takes me wrestling you to the ground, hog-tying your legs, throwing you over my shoulders, and carrying you back to the flock, that's what I will do, because that's what good and loving shepherds do. I will shepherd the flock with justice. How's this just? Because the weak are made strong and the strong are destroyed. And a good shepherd says that is right and just in the eyes of the Lord. And then he says this. We're going to skip down a little bit more. I want you to see the end of this. He says, I will save my flock. I will save my flock. When you're done trying to save yourself, when you're done trying to rescue yourself, when you're tired of trying every new trend and every new brand and following every new life coach or every new influencer, when you're done with all of that and you're ready for something that can secure you, ready for something that can place you on a firm foundation, ready to go in a direction that actually leads to a life of human flourishing instead of a hopeless life of fleeting happiness. If you're ready for all of that, he says, I will save my flock and they will no longer be plundered. And I will judge between one sheep and another. And he says, I will place over them a shepherd. I'm going to give them a shepherd. My servant David. Now, I need you to know, he's not talking about David because David's already dead at this point. Okay? I'm going to put a shepherd over them, my servant David. We're going to talk about what that means. And he will tend them. And he will tend them and be their shepherd. The promise of God in the Old Testament, he says there's a time coming and has come in Jesus on the cross. There's a time coming where I'm going to give you a shepherd, and I'm going to put a shepherd over you, and he's going to be a descendant of the bloodline of David. Like God actually does this. He promises this. He says, I'm going to save my flock. Here's how I'm going to save my flock. Here's how I'm going to save my flock. I'm going to give you a shepherd. He says it's going to be through David. It's going to be a descendant of the bloodline of David, and then Jesus is born. Jesus, who is a descendant of David. Jesus, who is, as we preach through the series of Jonah, Jesus, who calls himself the greater Jonah, is also the greater David. He shows up to shepherd his people, to lead his people as David led his people. And this is what Jesus says. Jesus in John chapter 10, we're going to spend weeks in this text in John chapter 10, but I want you to see it here. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know you've had a lot of bad shepherds. I know you've tried to go your own way. I know you've tried to do it on your own. You've gone after every fleeting idea and every vain and empty philosophy. And look, you can go after anything, but anything doesn't mean good. Everybody's following something, and something can be anything, and anything isn't always good. And so Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. You've got a shepherd. Somebody's leading you. Something's guiding you. There's a principle. There's a code. There's a morality. There's a religion. There's a compelling leader. There's a government. So like something is guiding you along, but something isn't always good. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd, look at this, lays down his life for the sheep. That's the difference. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, on the other hand. So if I'm getting to teach on elders and deacons and that role in the church, or if I'm really having to teach on anything that's related to like organizational leadership, I like this text. Because you see from this text a difference between a leader who has ownership in the flock. Right? Somebody who is willing to take spiritual ownership over it and like, I'm going to treat it like it's mine, versus somebody that's just a hired hand. And maybe in your job, you've seen the people. They're like, bro, I don't own stock in this company, right? Like, I don't really care. Like, I'm just here to collect the paycheck. And they're just hired hands. And it's fine. We need our hired hands, but we know that they're not going to go down with the ship. They're not going to lose the company for the sake of their job, or whatever, I said that backwards, but you guys get the idea, right? Like, they're not in it to sacrifice. They're in it to gain, right? That's what hired hands are. They're hired. You got to pay them, right? He says the hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters the flock. I had a job one time. This is embarrassing to talk about, but I'll tell you. Before I was in ministry, and not embarrassing, the job wasn't embarrassing. My performance in the job is what's embarrassing. So, and here's why. So I worked for a call center that did customer service for a cell phone company. If you've ever called your cell phone company, somebody like me answered the phone. And this particular call center was a contractor. It was a third-party company. So we weren't owned by the actual cell phone company. We just worked for the cell phone company and did their customer care, right? And so, you'd be sitting there with your little headset on, taking the calls, doing that. And it comes down through management, because people failed to keep their mouth shut, that call center was going to be closed in a couple of weeks. And I think we found out like a month in advance. And they're like, if you hang on for the next month, there'll be bonuses, But we all got the picture really quickly. Like a month from now, you will not be employed, right? It really, at that point, it doesn't matter if you do a good job or not, right? Like, what are they going to do? Fire you? You're already unemployed at the end of the month. Who cares, right? And so we all got, like, I was the worst. I got to this position where if you called me and you were even a little bit nice, I'd be like, here's $50 off your bill. Enjoy, ma'am. And be like, oh, wow, you don't have to do that. And be like, it's fine. What are they going to do? Take it on my paycheck, right? Like, I'm done. I'm fired. I'm out of here. Or people would call to me and they'd be a little bit rude. And so I would like redirect their call and just hang up and take the next call, right? And I know that sounds awful. Like, you should never do that at your job. But my point is, when you're a hired hand, that's the mindset, right? No skin off my back. I've got no skin in the game. It doesn't matter. I don't care. Like, I'm not inconvenienced at all. I would give people credit. I would give people discounts on their phone plan. Here's 15% off. If anybody asks, say that you're a veteran. I would just add discounts. Like, oh, well, what are they going to do? Right? And that's the mentality that you get when you're a part of something, but you have no ownership over it. Like, it doesn't really matter if this goes well or goes poorly. I don't really care. Here's what I mean, guys. When the wolves come, the hired hands run. They're not going to stand and fight. I've seen it in churches. Churches where, like, they bring in the minister, and the minister is, it's not his church, right? I've experienced this. Maybe this is my own church hurt coming out, but I'll just tell you. Like, you go there, and you kind of get the idea real quick that you're replaceable. Like, those people have been a part of this church their whole life. They were raised in this town, but if you don't toe the line, like, you're way easier to replace than the people who, like, own property in the town, right? And so, like, you're a hired hand. And you feel that, right? Like, if this church goes under, like, oh, well, I'll just go get the next job, right? And so, man, when we got to do this, and the elders here at this church was like, look, we want you to take ownership. We want you to lead with this. We became so willing to sacrifice. Now I feel like I'm, like, tooting my own horn or whatever, and I'm not meaning to do that. I try to preach in a way where I'm not the hero of my own stories. I think that's the right way to be. So forgive me. But, man, it's true. Like, when I remember when we transitioned and came over here. It was at a really tough time. And it was also at a time where other churches were kind of peeking in and going, hey, I think things are going downhill. Like, maybe we can steal them away. And so, like, the whole staff starts getting job offers from other churches. And I remember I was sitting with a member. I'm like, you realize, like, we turned down other jobs to get to do this. And I remember I was talking with one person, and they're like, why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you go get paid more to go to another? And I just remember having this conversation of going, like we bought into this. Like, we are willing to sacrifice for this. And we're just asking to build a church of people that are willing to sacrifice for the sake of this church. Because here's the truth of it, guys. Hired hands run when the wolves come. But real shepherds, real leaders, if you've got some ownership, if you see yourself as the spiritual leader of your household, are you not willing to sacrifice for them? Are you not willing to take the bites of the wolves for the sake of the flock? If you're an elder in your church, should you not be willing to inconvenience yourself, to sacrifice yourself, to pour yourself empty for the sake of those who need you? Do we not all, as citizens, want leaders in our country, want leaders in our political system that are willing to sacrifice and take a little bit less for themselves for the sake of the rest of us, right? Good shepherds sacrifice for the flock. Hired hands always run when the wolves come. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. And then he says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep by name. My sheep know me. And just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. What God teaches us, he goes, I'm going to send you a shepherd. And what you need to know about this shepherd, this descendant of David, this fulfillment of Old Testament messianic prophecy, what you need to know about this shepherd is also the lamb. He's the unblemished lamb. He's the one who lived better than you could live. He was sinless so that you didn't have to be, and he went to the cross to lay down his life for the sake of his sheep. The story of Jesus, of the good shepherd, is that Jesus is the one going, I'll take the punishment. I'll be the sacrifice. I will pour out my flesh and blood so that you can have life. That's what good shepherds do. So God says, look, I know your leaders have failed you in your country. I know the pastors have failed you in your churches. I know your parents have failed you in your homes. Great parents still aren't perfect parents. I know your parents have failed you in your home. So I'll be the shepherd, and I will send you the good shepherd. He's my son. His name is Jesus. And the good shepherd, as the unblemished lamb, will go to the cross and lay down his life for the sheep. So here's the point, guys. You're following something. My question is it good for you? Is it right for you? Does it give you purpose? Does it give you direction? Does it guide you? Is it providing for you a firm foundation of morals and principles that help you know the right way when you can't see the path in front of you? And when you feel hopeless, and when you feel scattered, when you feel small, when you realize you can't do it all on your own, when you realize when you try to be the shepherd, you just fail, and you hurt people, and you fail people, and you disappoint people, and you can't ever manage to be good enough. Will you just let the good shepherd do what the good shepherd does and go, hey, look, I know you failed, and I know you messed up, but I'll pay the price. I'll go to the cross, and I'll give up my life. I'll shed my blood. I'll let my body be broken for the sake of my sheep. I'm excited to preach this to you, but for now, I want to leave it there for you. I want to ask you, where are you going in your life, in your purpose? What are you following? What are you chasing after? And if you're tired of getting lost, if you're tired of wandering off and feeling scattered and feeling distant, if you've searched the mountaintops and the high points and the low points of life, and there's still longings of your heart that the world around you can't seem to ever fulfill in a lasting and sustaining way, I want to invite you to try Jesus. Follow Jesus. Let Jesus be the good shepherd. We're going to see this in the following weeks, but the Bible tells us that the good shepherd calls us by name, that we know the sound of his voice. He doesn't drive us. He calls us by name, and he leads us. And we follow after him. And he guides us to green pastures and to right paths and to still waters. I didn't do this last service. I'm going to do it this service. I hear PD queuing up the song back there, and it's just too perfect of a song for you guys to not know the context. So in case it hasn't been read for you recently, the 23rd Psalm says this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me on paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. For your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." That's what it means to follow the good shepherd. Trusting in him, giving your life to him, letting Jesus be the sacrifice for your sins, letting the good shepherd lay down his life is how we get the firm foundation. It's how we are led to quiet waters, to right paths, and green pastures. If you're tired of feeling lost and scattered, if you're tired of the division in the country and the culture around you, if you're wanting to be unified to something that is good, actually good, and leads to purpose, the best thing I can tell you is follow Jesus. Let Jesus be your shepherd, and let Jesus, as the good shepherd, lay down his life for you. let his sacrifice wash away your sins in the waters of baptism so that he can lead you to still waters, green pastures, and right paths. If that's you, if you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, we want to pray with you. We want to lift you up. If you just want to study the Bible and figure out what it means to follow Jesus, we want to invite you to do that. If there's any way we can do that for you, we ask you to come forward as we stand, as we sing.
When I feel alone, when I feel alone, I'm never alone. You are right beside me. Standing in the fire and with the ashes, you make something beautiful. No matter where I go, no matter where I go, you've already been. There is no shadow you are standing in. I won't fear tomorrow. You know what lies ahead. Green pastures, still waters are your promises. You are God with me. You are God with me. Emmanuel, beginning to the end. When you whisper peace, you still my heart. The power of your presence, it is revealed. And no matter where I go, you've already been. There is no shadow you are standing in. And I won't fear tomorrow. You know what lies ahead. Green pastures, still waters are your promises. You may be seated for communion.
Good morning. For those of you who don't know, I'm back. So you prayed for safety while